The meeting was already underway when the door opened. I did not look up right away. I was mid-sentence walking Roger through a debt service coverage ratio on the Schomburg property, and I had a habit from 37 years of working that I did not break for interruptions. You finish the thought. You let the room settle around the new information. You do not stop. But I heard Monica. "Dad," she said. "I didn't know you were going to be here." I stopped then. Looked up. She was standing in the doorway in her winter coat, her hand already at her throat, touching the little gold locket her mother gave her the day she graduated college. She touches it when she is nervous. She has touched it her whole adult life. Behind her, Derrick stood very still in the way a man stands still when he has just walked into a room and understood that the room is not the room he expected. I want you to hold that image for a moment. My son-in-law in a doorway, his wife's hand at her throat, the man who, 11 days earlier, had looked across a boardroom table and told a group of business partners that I used to work in insurance. Let me back up. Welcome to real-life Verdict. Get comfortable. The people in this story had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. My name is Franklin. I am 64 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom ranch in Naperville that my wife Elaine and I bought in 1989. She passed 4 years ago. The house is paid off. I keep it the way she kept it, more or less, though I have let the garden go a little in the back corner where she used to grow herbs. I have not been able to do much about that corner. I drive a 2006 Honda Accord with 174,000 miles on it, and a sun-faded hood I wash by hand every Sunday in the driveway. I retired 18 months ago from Northwestern Mutual after 37 years. I do not talk about what I did there unless someone asks. Most people do not ask. On the first Saturday of every month, I drive to the Naperville Public Library and I teach a free financial literacy workshop. Estate planning, life insurance structures, retirement asset protection. I use the same frameworks I spent almost 4 decades applying to billion-dollar portfolios. The people in my workshop are managing ordinary problems with ordinary money, and they deserve the same rigor. That is the whole philosophy. I bring coffee from home in a thermos, and I stay as long as anyone has questions. That is who I am. I want you to have that picture clearly before I tell you the rest. My daughter Monica is 36. She is kind and she is perceptive, and she married a man named Derrick 3 years ago after a courtship that moved faster than I thought it should. I did not say anything. Elaine was gone by then, and I did not trust my own judgment about what was worry and what was grief making me hold things too tight. I wrote a generous check for the wedding. I attended. I sat in the front row and I watched my daughter walk down the aisle wearing her mother's locket, and I thought, she seems happy. I let that be enough. Derrick runs a commercial real estate development firm. Outer Chicago suburbs, legitimate work. I want to be fair about that. He is not a fraud exactly. He is a man who operates at the edge of what he can actually afford to promise. Perpetually undercapitalized. Perpetually closing the deal that will fix everything. He has a talent for walking into a room and making it feel like things are moving, like money is nearby, like the project is nearly done. It is a real skill. It is not the same skill as finishing things. What I noticed over 3 years of dinners and holidays and birthday calls was the way Derrick cataloged people. Not rudely. He was never rude, but he would be talking about someone and he would say things like, "She knows someone," or "He can help us with that," even when the person he was describing was standing right there in the room, as if he was taking inventory. As if people were tools he was sorting and shelving for later use. I noticed it. I did not mention it to Monica. It seemed at the time like it might just be a professional habit, the way some people from certain industries never fully stop speaking in the register of the office. What I did not realize was that he had cataloged me too. The entry, I would later understand, read something like, "Comfortable retiree, insurance background, No continuing relevance, possible inheritance at some point, can be introduced as context without adding much to the room. He was not wrong about any of it exactly. That is the part that stays with me a little. November 14th, a Thursday. I remember the weather because I had washed the car the Sunday before, and there had been a light sleet the previous day, and there were water spots along the driver's side door that bothered me when I got in. I was in Oakbrook for a routine reason that had nothing to do with Derrick. A former contact had asked me to look at something informally, the kind of favor I did occasionally for people I had worked with for decades. The building was a shared executive office space on Willow Road. I stepped off the elevator at 2:38 p.m. and walked toward the reception area, and I nearly ran into my son-in-law. Derrick's expression when he saw me did something I cannot entirely describe. It was not alarm. It was not happiness. It was the look of a man whose sorting system has thrown up an error. This item is in the wrong bin. He recovered quickly. He smiled. He said something like, "Franklin, what are you doing here?" with the tone of someone who has just encountered their barber at the grocery store. I told him I had a meeting on the floor. He said he did too. He said his partners were already inside. Did I want to come say hello? It would only be a minute. I want to be honest with you about this moment. I did not sense what was coming. I thought it was a coincidence. I followed him in. The boardroom was a long table, 6 chairs, a window looking out over the parking lot, 2 men already seated. Roger Vincennes, though I did not know his name yet, and a man named Greg. Derrick walked to the head of the table and gestured in my direction without quite looking at me and said, "This is my wife's father. He used to work in insurance." That was the sentence. 11 words. He was already looking at his phone before he finished it. I sat down at the far end of the table. I did not say anything. I did not push back my chair and stand up. I did not correct the record. I have spent 37 years in rooms where people underestimate what is in front of them, and I learned a long time ago that the correction takes care of itself if you wait. I want you to understand something about me. I do not require an introduction. I have never required one. Elaine used to say I was the only person she knew who could walk into a party where he knew no one and leave 3 hours later, having learned something from everyone in the room and having told them almost nothing about himself. She did not say it as a criticism. She just found it remarkable. I am telling you this because what I did next is not something I decided in that moment. It is just who I am. I put my hands on the table and I waited. Roger Vincennes was looking at me. Not the way you look at someone you are being polite to, the way you look at someone when something has just clicked into place, but you are not sure you have it right. He was staring at me with his pen stopped mid-air over his notebook. A battered Moleskine, I noticed, the kind people use when they actually write things down. And then he interrupted Derrick mid-sentence. "Franklin," he said, "I didn't realize you knew Derrick. I've been trying to reach you since April about the Schomburg project. Can we talk after this?" Derrick heard his own name attached to mine. He heard it in a sentence where my name was the subject and his name was a mild surprise. I did not look at him. I looked at Roger and said I would be glad to. 3 minutes later, Greg asked me if I was the same Franklin Kemp who worked on the Riverside Mall refinancing in 2015. I told him I was. He visibly exhaled, and then he started asking me questions about a current deal that had been bothering him, the kind of specific, structured questions that tell you someone has been holding a problem without anyone to hand it to. I answered them. Derrick tried twice to redirect the conversation. The room did not follow him. At 3:10 p.m., Roger asked if I was still taking consulting clients. I said I was selective but willing to look at the right projects. He said, "Could we schedule something next week?" I said yes. I did not look at Derrick during this exchange, but I could see him in my peripheral vision. the way you can see a man rearranging his face when the arrangement is not working anymore. At 3:22 p.m., I walked to my car in the parking lot. Derrick followed me out. He was doing the thing people do when they want to pretend something was fine when they both know it was not fine. He laughed a little and said, "Small world," and said he had no idea I knew those guys. I nodded. I got in the Accord. I drove home. I said nothing. Not to Derrick. Not to Monica. Not to anyone for 3 days. I sat with it the way you sit with something you have not yet decided what to do about. He used to work in insurance. The sentence turned over and over. Not because it hurt, exactly. It hurt, yes. But that was not the part I kept coming back to. What I kept coming back to was the 11 words, and the phone he was already looking at, and the vague gesture in my direction, and the thing those 11 words told me about what 3 years of dinners and gifts and front-row seats had meant to the man my daughter had chosen. A measurement, a very small one. On day 3, Paul Osterman came over and sat at my kitchen table. Paul is 58. He spent 15 years as my counterpart at a competing firm before we became consulting partners. He keeps a case of 15 vintage fountain pens on his desk and rotates through them daily. That day he was using a dark green one with a gold nib that he had mentioned was a 1968 Pelican. He set it down next to his coffee and looked at me and said, "You want me to make some calls, or are you handling this yourself?" I told him not to make any calls. I asked him to pull whatever was publicly available on Derrick's firm's financials and give me a clean summary. Nothing I could not have found myself with enough time, just faster. He gave me one look that lasted about 2 seconds. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something in the margin of the folder he had brought. I want to stay with this moment a little because this is where I want to be clear about something. Paul was offering me a shortcut. He knows people. He could have made this faster and more complete and, depending on your perspective, more satisfying. I did not want that. Derrick had made a miscalculation. I did not need to punish him for it. I needed him to find out, in the most factual way possible, what the miscalculation had been. There is a difference. It is a difference I care about. I had something else, too. Something I had not told Paul yet, something that had been sitting in the back of my understanding since the moment I sat down at that table and heard Roger Vincennes say he had been trying to reach me since April. I did not tell Paul what it was yet. I just let him do the work. Day 7. Paul's summary arrived by email. I printed it, read it once, folded it, and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. I want you to understand what kind of reading that was. I spent 37 years reading documents that told me how much exposure a company had, how far they were from the edge, and what would happen when they got there. I read that summary the same way I read every document of that kind. Not with satisfaction, with assessment. What it told me was this: Derrick was leveraged to the boundary of what his firm could survive. He had been pitching projects he could not close. He had 3 deals in various stages of partial commitment and not enough capital behind any of them to make good if one of them slowed. He was not a fraud. He was something almost more precarious than a fraud, a man who believed his own projections and whose projections had been wrong for 2 consecutive years. I put the summary back in my pocket. I had one thing Derrick had not accounted for. I knew what it was now, and I knew exactly what it meant for the room he was about to walk back into. I want you to stay with me here, because this is where everything Derrick thought he understood started to come apart, not because of anything I had done, but because of what he had failed to find out before he opened his mouth. Day 8. Day 9. No calls from Derrick. Monica sent a text about Thanksgiving logistics. I responded about Thanksgiving logistics. I did not mention anything else. Day 10. I woke up earlier than usual and sat in the kitchen with my coffee. The house was quiet the way it is quiet when you have lived alone long enough that the silence has become a kind of company. I thought about Elaine. I thought about Monica in the doorway of the church and her mother's locket. I thought about 11 words and a vague gesture, and a man who had never once in 3 years asked me a single question about what I had done for 37 years. He had introduced himself to everyone in that room. He had introduced me to no one. Day 11, Roger Vincennes called me. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that Derrick had been calling him repeatedly, trying to clarify his relationship with Franklin. Roger said he found it a little unusual and asked carefully if there was any tension in the family situation that he should be aware of. "We're family," I said. "It's complicated." Roger said he understood. Then he asked if I could come in the following week for a full working session on the Schomburg project. He said he wanted me at the table for the duration. I said I could do that. That was when I understood what was happening. I had not made any calls. I had not sent any letters. I had not told Monica. I had not leveraged a single relationship or spent a single favor. I had simply continued to be who I had always been, and the room had reorganized itself around that fact, the way water reorganizes itself around that fact, the way water reorganizes itself around a stone. Derrick's phone calls to Roger were doing the work. Derrick's anxiety was doing the work. The miscalculation was doing the work. I had not moved at all, and the ground had shifted under him entirely. And now, here is what I want you to understand. Here is the thing that had been sealed in the back of my thinking since the day I sat down at that table. Roger Vincennes had been trying to reach me since April. 8 months. He had a troubled refinancing on the Schomburg project, and he had been working through contacts trying to find someone who could help him structure the risk. He had been reaching out through mutual acquaintances, through former colleagues, through industry contacts I did not even know we shared. For 8 months, he had been trying to get to me. He had no idea that his business partner had been married for 3 years to my daughter. And Derrick, who had introduced me as his wife's father, who used to work in insurance, had no idea that the man sitting across from him whose judgment he needed most was the same man he had just described to everyone in the room as a mild piece of background information. One of his own partners had been trying to reach me for 8 months. And Derrick had walked me into that room, gestured in my direction, and handed me an introduction I had not asked for. I spent 37 years underwriting and structuring risk on commercial real estate portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My name is known to anyone operating at a certain level in institutional lending and large-scale development in this part of the country. I did not advertise this. I did not need to. It was simply true, the way a foundation is true. Present whether you look at it or not. Derrick had never looked. Now I had Paul's summary in my jacket pocket. I had Roger's invitation on my calendar. I had 11 days of careful, deliberate stillness behind me. I called Paul back that evening. I told him what I was going to do. He listened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's it? You're just going to go to the meeting?" I said yes. He thought about that. "All right," he said. "You need anything from me before you walk in there?" I told him I had everything I needed. I thanked him. He said, "You know you could have let me make those calls." I told him I knew. He said he understood why I hadn't. November 25th. The same building, the same 6th floor, the same boardroom with the window looking out over the parking lot. I arrived 20 minutes early. Roger was already there. Greg was there. The financials were spread across the table. I was mid-sentence walking Roger through the debt service coverage ratio when the door opened. "Monica." "Dad," she said. "I didn't know you were going to be here." Behind her, Derrick. I stopped. I nodded at Monica. I waited. Roger looked up and said, "Derrick, good timing. I was going to call you. I want you to meet the consultant I mentioned." He gestured at me the way you gesture at someone who does not need further explanation. I watched Derrick understand the room. It took perhaps 4 seconds. He looked at Roger. He looked at Greg. He looked at the financials on the table. And then he looked at me. I want to be precise about his face in that moment. It did not go red. It did not crumple. What left it was something more specific than emotion. What left it was the expression of a man who has been holding a card he believed was the winning card and has just turned it over and found something else entirely. He sat down. I continued the explanation I had been giving before he arrived. We worked through the risk structure for the next 40 minutes. Roger asked questions. Greg took notes. Derrick said 4 words, total, none of them about the work. Monica sat very still in a chair along the wall with her hand at her throat. At the end, when we were standing and gathering papers, I looked at Roger. "Before I go," I said, "just so we're clear on my role here. I kept my voice the way I keep my voice, even, factual, without decoration. This is my daughter's husband. He used to work in commercial real estate, the same construction, the same casual register. The same reduction of 37 years of a person to a single vague clause. The same devastation." Derrick. He looked back at me. He said nothing, but his expression said he had understood everything, including the 11 days that had preceded this moment. Derrick looked at the window. I shook Roger's hand. I shook Greg's hand. I nodded at Derrick without warmth. I told Monica I would call her later in the week. Then I walked out, took the elevator down, and pushed through the glass door into the November air. It was cold, 34 degrees and dropping. I pulled my jacket closed over Paul's folded summary, still in the inside pocket. I walked to the Accord. There was a water spot on the driver's side door that the sleet from the week before had left, and I noticed it, and I thought, Sunday. I will take care of it Sunday. I got in the car. I drove home. I had spent 37 years knowing exactly what something was worth. The skill did not leave when I retired. It was simply waiting the way all real things wait for someone to ask. No one had asked. Eventually, the room had answered anyway. That was enough.